What's up, my fellow thermal extraction enthusiasts? We are back with one of the biggest, heaviest hitting torch powered vapes that I've used since I've started doing this channel. And honestly, this one has been a real love-hate relationship. And when I first got this vape, I was a little intimidated and scared by it because it was one that just had such a high potential of combusting or really hurting my lungs. Since I've had time to really dial in my experience with the Anvil, I can say this has quickly grown to be one of my vapes that wins the reach test almost every single day. And since I got the Anvil, it actually had an update with a new oven that you see here called the ThermoCore. Before we jump into my uses and what setups I use it on, let's just go over a little bit about what's different in this new oven. So here you have it, the two ovens side by side. This oven you see here is what Vestratto refers to as the user's edition or just the regular oven. They did have an update in between these two called the DuraCore, which I didn't get because from what I saw my friends say and other reviews on the internet is that the DuraCore didn't really offer that much more of a difference. The ThermoCore, however, I have noticed is a huge upgrade, and one of the biggest places you can see the upgrade is in this band here, where they added a lot more mass in this little section here and added some stainless steel so it could interact with induction heaters way better. And with the upcoming release of Vestratto's Forge, which is something I'm really looking forward to, this will be a system that you'll be able to use without a torch, making it really easy and awesome. And if it can hit as heavy with an induction heater as it can a torch, I'm very excited to see that. Since the Forge isn't out yet, let's just stick with talking about how it works with a torch. Internally, there weren't that many differences. But when I got this new oven, I did get to explore using the XL bowl, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So if we're just going to talk about the oven, let's just start from the bottom. It doesn't seem like there was any different or improvements in the air slot or any of the air holes here. I do typically only use it on the USA, which didn't see an update with the oven. Then we go up to the first thermal battery here. It looks like on the ThermoCore we're just a little bit bigger and wider, just adding to the mass of this oven. And while the mass is good for usage, it does mean that this oven stays really hot a lot longer. So when you're doing back-to-back bowls, dealing with it to reload is just a little bit spicier. We move up to the second thermal battery band. And you can see instead of this one being almost flush with the outside of the oven, there's actually another break here to really emphasize this new chunk of stainless steel and copper, which really makes the big difference in the ThermoCore. With the old oven, I used to take my torch and stick it right here in this gap and just point it so the tip of the flame was right here, just tip to gap, and that's where I would heat it. And it would take about 30 seconds. When I first picked up the ThermoCore, I was like, well, it's an Anvil, so I'm just going to heat it exactly the same. And I put my torch there and I went to heat it and boom, my first heat up with the new oven, I combusted, which was kind of sad, but also really made me realize that this oven makes a big difference. Once I got it all cleaned up and got the combustion smell out of there, I decided I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So what I found out is that now with the ThermoCore, I actually am pointing my torch way more up here towards the center. And even though I have in theory lowered my temperature, the ThermoCore hits way harder up here. And because it is a lower temperature that retains the heat more, I can take way bigger hits than I could off this one. Because of my sensitive lungs, they really like lower temperatures. So a lower temperature with sustained heat is always what I'm looking for, whether it's in my dry herb vapes or in my quartz bangers. Low temp, sustained heat is always a win. And that's exactly what you get with the ThermoCore. And since you can go lower temperatures with sustained heat, you can also use your intake of airflow to drive the heat up inside of the chamber, which is something I really liked doing with the original oven. Is I would heat it up to the first click and then wait for the temperature to rise and heat soak for the second click, or use my air draw to draw in the hot air into the chamber to raise that temperature up. So with the ThermoCore, since it has so much more mass and holds that temperature on the outside way more, I can use the inhalation speed of which I hit the rig to drive up the temperature in the chamber. Next up, let's talk about bowls. With the old Anvil oven, I struggled a lot with the XL. I always felt like I was either overheating or underheating the chamber. Because of the extra volume, it just didn't have the heat retention to drive the XL bowl where I wanted it to go. Now, with the ThermoCore, I can hit the XL bowl right here in the middle of the chamber, and it is a great experience. Also, something I mentioned about the original Anvil was it struggled on flavor a lot because I always felt like you had to drive it up so high to get those one-hit extractions, and doing a two-hit extraction was just not my vibe with the end. With the ThermoCore, you can drop down that temperature, and even with the XL bowl, get these full, wonderful one-hit extractions here pointed with your torch in the middle, and tons of flavor. I am just absolutely amazed with how much of a difference this new oven has made with the Anvil and really put it at the top of my reach test. The other thing I noted with the XL bowl that I like a lot more than the full bowl is with the full bowl, you have this gap underneath here and you have a screen on the inside of the bowl. With the XL bowl, it's all the way to the bottom, so you don't have a gap here, and there's no screen inside of the bowl, which makes this a lot easier to clean. And I also feel like the click discs are a lot more protected and separated from the herb chamber. The only thing I've noticed is that this laser etching that they've done that says Vestratto around the side does attract a good amount of dry herb in there. To get that out, sometimes I brush it or use a Q-tip just to push all that stuff out. But overall, the Anvil ThermoCore with the XL chamber has been an absolute win, and I really give props to Vestratto for stepping up the game. And this is where the Anvil should have been from day one. So now that we've talked about the oven and the chamber, you can see here that I don't have the stock Anvil Stem. From my prior experiences with the Anvil Stem, I just wasn't really a fan. The lack of adjustability and the difficulty I had cleaning it just made it not worth it. So now, in my general use case, I always default to a USA adapter on an MVS or just a Simrel 10mm water pipe adapter. And this is some of the best flexibility I've had out of the Anvil because you can hit it dry natively or in water, and also you have the ability to adjust the airflow with the USA. Last up, one of the biggest things about the Anvil was shipping to the US was always kind of a pain in the butt because they're one of the few companies that is actually based outside of the US, so shipping times and shipping was always kind of long and expensive. But luckily now you can buy Anvil parts and accessories from one of my buddies, the Simrel collection, which has made the Anvil really accessible in the States. Well, enough talk. Let's go ahead and show you this thing in action. One of my favorite things to do with the Anvil, and really where I feel like it shines, is something called a Twax Bowl. And a Twax Bowl is where you take just a little bit of your favorite concentrate, whether it's temple ball hash or just some hash rosin like this. You throw that in the bowl first, and then you grab some of your favorite flour and go ahead and just load the flour into the bowl. You don't want to pack it too hard, a nice loose pack. Get the flour from the outside off. No need to tamp it down. I throw it in there, just screw that on. Just a note, when you are screwing the oven on, make sure you don't lock it down real tight, because what happens is when you heat up the oven, the metal expands and you can get something called thermal lock, which is where these two things bind up, and it's kind of difficult to get them apart. So when I tighten it down, what I do is I just barely ever so slightly back it off just a tiny bit. Now that I've gotten everything all loaded up, I was really lucky that I have this rig, and the way that this all lines up, I can use my Firefox torch for a near hands-free experience. So let's go ahead and get this heated up. That was just a ton of clouds. And even off a really tiny rig like this, it was really good and a nice experience, which is something I didn't really have with the Anvil before, which is I never really hit it and went, wow, that was fantastic. I was always like, wow, that worked, but really kicked my ass. Now, with the ThermoCore, I've been just hands down enjoying the experience. So let's go ahead and check it out inside the chamber to see where that got us on our ABV. So before I show you the ABV, I just wanted to show you this. This is when I use my poker to empty out the chamber like this. You can see all these little flecks that show up on the outside of the laser letters, which is why I take a brush or a Q-tip and just try and get all of this stuff out from the letters when I empty the bowl. Now you can see this ABV, super even and quite dark for where I normally like to go. And again, that just speaks to how nice the Anvil is if my sensitive lungs can push it this dark, where usually other things will really irritate them when it gets this dark. I can get this dark with the Anvil and still not die, which is a huge improvement over the last oven. That about wraps it up for the new Anvil ThermoCore, which has been an absolute win in my book. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay lifted. Psst, come hang out with us on Discord.